Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof.com, and I'm pleased to be with you for another edition of the Dissenter Weekly. It's January 14th. Before we get rolling on our whistleblower stories for this week, I would like you to make sure you hit the red subscribe button below the video to follow our show. And remember that Shadowproof is 100% reader funded and supported. Our ability to do this show depends on your support. And if you want to help us keep this show going and grow our organization, we encourage you to look at our options for donating and becoming a member of Shadowproof. Now, I'm going to be doing this solo without Brian, who had to take care of some things. So let me get rolling here. The first story that I want to cover, let me click on the banner for this, is a story that I covered. And also, just let me say, if for some reason the audio has an issue or you're not seeing me, we have connectivity problems, please let me know in the chat because I do not have Brian here to let me know if there's anything going wrong. So I presume if I don't hear from you, all is going well. The story to start us off for this edition of Dissenter Weekly is about some whistleblowers at Voice of America who protested Mike Pompeo and called it a publicity stunt. His speech that he did at the Voice of America building in Washington, D.C. This took place on January 11th, and this was planned before the riot at Capitol Hill. But now, with the way the media has completely decided that almost any official linked to the Trump administration will not be allowed on their broadcasts. And if they are, I mean, they definitely aren't going to be able to just spread their message without any hostility being shown toward them. And so Mike Pompeo wanted a kind of safe space that he could give his big speech about American exceptionalism and America's greatness. He still stands with Trump, and so he wanted a platform, and so he turned to U.S. government-funded media in order to make that possible. And some whistleblowers at Voice of America who have been involved in a kind of ugly fight because it's been hijacked by conservatives. They're making it even more of a kind of state-funded media organization, even more of a propaganda outlet than it already was. To some degree, Voice of America, just because it's a state-funded media organization, it always was promoting the interests of the United States, promoting U.S. foreign policy in particular, projecting that to the world, and that has affiliates in countries where it's important to the U.S. government to project its message and insert that message into, whether it's challenging Russia or China or challenging Iran, using Voice of America in order to counter those countries who we all know are designated as official enemies of the United States. And yet it's even worse for these people as they're being accused of being agents of the deep state. Been efforts to purge some of these people from their jobs, and with this speech, it was set up in such a manner that outside media could not attend. What they did was they planned it, and they said that COVID-19 meant that they could not invite people to the space to attend Mike Pompeo's speech. And remember, Mike Pompeo is somebody who stood before the press at the State Department and said there was going to be a second term of the Trump administration. And he hasn't really recanted his comments that promoted this idea that somehow Trump was going to find a way to hang on and Biden wouldn't be inaugurated. So there was an uproar among these whistleblowers because they were denying outside media. And meanwhile, they were saying that employees of Voice of America could attend this speech. And the speech was to be broadcast through all the Voice of America channels, to be on Voice of America's YouTube channel as well. And they condemned it as political propaganda. The quote here is a broadcast speech by the outgoing Secretary of State on topics on which he has been widely covered should be seen for what it is, the use of Voice of America to disseminate political propaganda in the waning days of the Trump administration. As proposed, the planned coverage by language services will be one-sided and lack the necessary objectivity protected by the firewall. It is political meddling. They make a kind of a big deal about how there's supposed to be a sort of editorial firewall that prevents policy of an administration from entering the journalism that people at Voice of America do. And I think typically that has stood up and been far more capable of withstanding political interference or influence than during this Trump administration, as the person who is the director is actually a conservative documentary filmmaker. I mean, I don't know any of the work that this person has done, but his name is Michael Pack, and he runs the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which is the wider sort of arm of U.S. government-funded media. And so there were like $4,000 plunged into this, what they call a publicity stunt, according to these whistleblowers. And after, because there were no journalists there, one Voice of America journalist tried to question Mike Pompeo at the end, and even asked, "Do you regret saying there will be a second Trump administration?" She blurted these questions out because there was no Q&A for him. There was a Q&A with someone who is a Voice of America director, but there was no Q&A where Voice of America people could ask Pompeo about the end of the Trump administration. And so she blurted out. Her name is Patsy Widakuswara, and she was a White House. She was assigned to the White House, and she blurts out, "Do you regret saying there will be a second Trump administration?" And she was fired. She was reassigned from this position. I guess technically she wasn't fired, but she was told she no longer is going to be on this beat covering the White House, and was moved to another beat in retaliation for asking Mike Pompeo questions from the audience. And what kind of a speech did we get from Mike Pompeo? What is this? Well, he actually attacked people at Voice of America, and he said things to really seize upon the conflict we see happening in our politics, and manipulate it for his purpose of using Voice of America in the way that he would like to use it. He accused the whistleblowers of having a censorial instinct, and he suggested that they themselves, he suggested that all of them are basically engaged in promoting censorship, and it's a product of wokeness or political correctness. It all points in one direction: authoritarianism cloaked as moral righteousness. And it's similar to what we're seeing at Twitter, Facebook, and Apple, and on too many university campuses today. It's not who we are. It's not who we are as Americans. It's not what Voice of America should be. It's time that we simply put wokeism to sleep, which is pretty ridiculous, because he himself was involved in the attack on Julian Assange, demonizing WikiLeaks. He led that campaign, and that speech that he gave, one of his first speeches as CIA director, singling out WikiLeaks, is authoritarianism cloaked as moral righteousness. In fact, in my view, almost every single speech that Mike Pompeo has ever given as Secretary of State was authoritarianism cloaked as moral righteousness. In fact, you could make an argument that that's much of what we hear from these people who run our institutions, political elites in the Trump administration. Some of them who came from Obama's administration is authoritarianism cloaked as moral righteousness. I think Mike Pompeo just gave me a quick sort of phrase to describe people who represent some of these organizations. And, anytime that I want to put my finger on what isn't right, I believe I'm going to refer back to this and go, it's authoritarianism cloaked as moral righteousness, because he went on to talk about false narratives that don't suit the CIA, of course, because WikiLeaks is exposing war crimes and torture that wouldn't suit the CIA and the broader intelligence community. So in any case, he concluded with this series of words that celebrated American exceptionalism. He said, I tell audiences about American exceptionalism wherever and whenever I can, because it's true and because it's important. America is good and great, and everyone who truly grabs our founding understands this. And this is someone who's in denial. He wanted to meet with world leaders after what happened on Capitol Hill, and he was denied meetings. He learned that they did not want to meet with him because of what took place. America took quite a hit because everyone looked at it and they said, how dare you lecture us on democracy after what happened? You just almost let a mob take over Capitol Hill, and you've got politicians who are delegitimizing your election, and they didn't want to meet with Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo needed to give this kind of a speech. He needed a safe space. And essentially, Voice of America at the end of Donald Trump's administration is the kind of state media that is often condemned by the U.S. government in its effort to look like, we have free and fairer media, or that the United States is more tolerant. The things that they allege against Russia Today, what they might allege against a Chinese state media outlet. Basically, Voice of America is involved in purging anyone who doesn't toe a political line, and has been for the last months. And then by putting on this kind of propaganda, this publicity stunt, it's very clear that this is it's a good endpoint for Mike Pompeo's time at the State Department, because, like I said, he's an authoritarian who believes he's morally righteous, and there's really not too much more to add. And Jack keeps telling me Mike Pompeo is a gigantic blob of satanic jelly, and I feel like that is something we could all have a campaign to put on the wall somewhere in the State Department as a description, maybe underneath the photo, as they remember. They probably have a wall of all the former Secretary of States, and we could put this underneath his image as a descriptor for what his time was like at the State Department. So let's continue on to our next story. I want to talk about the Intercept, who we now learn from a open letter that was posted by Laura Poitras, the co-founder of the Intercept. We learned that she was fired 2 months ago because she talked to the New York Times about the way in which they failed to protect Reality Winner when Reality Winner sent them a document for them to publish. And there's a lot to what went down, and essentially there was an accounting of what happened that was supposed to be done. We've never been able to read this report. They won't engage in transparency and share with the public what led to the fiasco that ultimately resulted in the negligence, which meant that Reality Winner was arrested before The Intercept even published their story. But I'll go ahead and read to you some bits here from the open letter that was posted on January 14th, so today, as we're just before we were to broadcast. She revealed that she was fired from First Look Media, an organization she co-founded. Her termination was because she spoke out about the failure to protect whistleblower Reality Winner, and because she criticized the cover-up and lack of accountability that followed, and because she raised concerns about patterns of discrimination and retaliation at the media organization. She was told this was effective immediately, without cause, and her access to email was shut down, and the company had no plans to communicate that she was fired to the public. She reminds everyone that The Intercept was founded around whistleblowing and investigative journalism that involved Edward Snowden's disclosures and sharing his documents that exposed illegal global mass surveillance programs. She says the decision to fire her raising concerns about source protection and accountability, rather than to demote or seek the resignation of anyone responsible for the journalistic malpractice, cover-up, and retaliation, speaks to the priorities of The Intercept's editor-in-chief, Betsy Reed, and First Look Media's CEO, Michael Bloom. So she singles them out, and Betsy has been at the center of a lot of allegations of how The Intercept has strayed from its original mission. Laura writes, journalists make mistakes, sometimes with serious consequences. What is alarming about this case is the multitude of mistakes, the egregious disregard for source protection, and the mishandling of an internal review that ended with a cover-up. It goes without saying that no one should participate in an investigation into themselves, yet this is what happened at The Intercept. Editor-in-chief Betsy Reed, who oversaw the reporting on Winner's NSA leak, took an active behind-the-scenes role in the investigation, assigned staff who reported directly to her to gather facts, and when the facts pointed to editorial failures, Reed removed the staff person from the investigation. The Intercept's claim that an independent investigation was conducted is false. The so-called independent review was done by the same lawyer who worked on the NSA/Winner story. The Intercept should correct the record and apologize to its readers. And then she goes on to say that she believes Bloom and Reed have demonstrated repeatedly they consider the whistleblowers and journalists who risk their lives on behalf of the organization, that they feel they're disposable. Quote, they demonstrated this by their lack of effort to protect Reality Winner, and again when they didn't bother to inform Edward Snowden of their decision to defund the NSA archive, and now by firing me on a day's notice from an organization built upon my work and reputation without even informing the staff or the public of their decision. So then she says what we can expect to hear from First Look Media as their defense for their actions. She believes that First Look will claim that there was no retaliation, that First Look will claim the organization has moved away from its co-founder's mission, even though that mission still appears on tax filings and fundraising emails. She believes The Intercept will say it's under attack. She believes that they will claim that Reality Winner was responsible for being found out and discovered by government or the FBI, and basically the evidence that The Intercept mishandled this did not have a material impact on whether she was identified or not, although it is clear they were negligent. Laura also says that she believes they'll say that her contract wrapped up, even though there is no end date for her contract, and that they may claim that Laura Poitras never really contributed much of value anyway, because she didn't do the kind of regular writing that others at the Intercept did. However, she's a filmmaker, and it's clear she was contributing in other ways. So then Laura lays out some part of her background and history with First Look, and then she says, quote, because of the Intercept's negligence, including their failure to consult with their own security experts, Reality Winner was arrested before the story was even published. And that's true. Reality Winner was denied the crucial window of time for the focus to be on the information she risked her personal freedom to reveal to the public. And she's still in prison. And she is in prison. She's filed a sexual abuse claim, and she's been surviving COVID. And all of this should weigh on the Intercept, as although, you know, when you put my coverage side by side with their coverage, it's very lacking, and it doesn't seem like they have the same duty, or feel they have the same duty to their source, and I think people should be highly critical of them for not being there every step of the way here. They should be some of the loudest advocates for a pardon, and it should be routine and regular, and yet there isn't a whole lot from them as far as the coverage goes of her case. The government's prosecution of Winner and her extreme prison sentence are unconscionable, Laura Poitras writes. As I argued last month, the Espionage Act is being abused by the government to selectively prosecute sources and whistleblowers, and to intimidate journalists and news organizations seeking to publish information that the government wants to suppress. The Biden administration should pardon Reality Winner on their first day in office, but this does not excuse journalists and news organizations from doing their job to protect sources. The tragedy here is that First Look Media and the Intercept had all the financial resources and digital security expertise to do this right, and yet they failed to apply their basic founding principles of source protection and accountability to themselves. Instead of conducting an honest, independent, and transparent assessment with meaningful consequences, First Look fired me for speaking out, exposing the gulf between the organization's purported values and its practice. So that's her statement as released. And just to be clear with everyone, what just so we're all clear here, seeing comments here, the pardon that I'm talking about is for Reality Winner. We will get to Julian Assange. So in this case, with Laura Poitras, I want to just establish for you that she talked to the New York Times back in August for an article about the Intercept and how it failed its source. And what she said to the Intercept, which is this is why she's facing why she was retaliated and fired. She said, "We founded this organization on the principle of holding the powerful accountable and protecting whistleblowers. Not only was this a cover-up and betrayal of core values, but the lack of any meaningful accountability promoted a culture of impunity and puts future sources at risk." And what the Intercept is dealing with here is the fact that they have destroyed and ruined their own brand. They were not able to protect a source. They have strayed from the kind of whistleblower scoops that defined their founding. They have gone a different direction, and they have also taken their eyes off many of these issues that they should be following and caring about regularly if they're to be the organization they claimed to be when they started. But now without Glenn and without Laura, they are much different. And they're to me, it's like they're building a kind of nation magazine, except they don't have the storied history. They don't have the 150 years of publishing that makes the nation a kind of titan when it comes to progressive journalism. they seem to be modeling themselves in the image of maybe the American prospect, but they were not just out to become a progressive media outlet that could support the insurgency of the Democratic Party, within the Democratic Party, fuel the resistance and activism among people in the Democratic base who demand more out of Democrats. I mean, I understood their website to be much different than that, because there are plenty of sites out there that cater to progressive Democrats and their policies and are beholden to the spectrum of possibilities that are set by the Democratic Party establishment. And so this is not what the Intercept was originally set up to be. And it is very clear that there is something here that they all continue to refuse to reckon with. And the easiest way to solve this would be to put out evidence of an investigation and let people know what took place when Reality Winner was outed. As a result, I mean, it fueled it. The negligence on the part of the organization fueled it and made it so that she was caught much faster, and she served the longest prison sentence of anyone prosecuted under the Espionage Act, something the Trump administration celebrated, and the Intercept bears responsibility for what happened to her. And there are certain people who I respect who will not deny that, but as the leadership of the Intercept goes, there's still a lot more that they need to do to reckon with what happened here. And I will continue now to the next thing. I want to talk about this Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton and his office in Texas is saying that he's exempt from the state's whistleblower protection law. We discussed this on the show last year in October when this was erupting, the scandal. There were 7 whistleblowers that were purged from the Texas Attorney General's office. They accused Paxton of criminal activity. They said that that he was involved in bribery and abuse of his office. And to some degree, this is state politics. I won't get into the weeds and talk about this, but Paxton lashed out at them and called them rogues. This was reported on by the Austin American-Statesman and other local media in Texas. And it was put this way, that the decisions to report possible illegal activity involving their employer represent a stunning development in an agency that prizes loyalty, particularly from within Paxton's inner circle. It places a renewed spotlight on Paxton, who is already under indictment for alleged securities fraud. So at that time, he was already in trouble with the law. And the local media was saying it was stunning that people in and around him were turning on him. And now, if you go to coverage in the Texas Tribune, you see that he is saying that and it's very similar to what we hear people who run the executive branch say. He is claiming that he is exempt from the state whistleblower law because he's some kind of an executive figure. And I think that this shows the impunity, the culture of impunity. It's sort of a trickle down effect here, where now a governor in the state of Texas is making arguments that we hear from our officials in the White House, be they Republican or Democrat. They repeat this in order to claim that they don't have to be held accountable. And he's saying the Texas Whistleblower Act does not apply to him. He suggests that he's not a governmental entity and he's not a public employee, and thus the Whistleblower Act does not extend protection to reports of unlawful conduct made against the Attorney General personally. But I mean, he's elected by the people. I mean, to some degree, he's there because of the people in Texas who, have chosen. In any case, they picked the governor who's going to be in Texas. So, I mean, there's that political aspect of it. So, all of the attorneys for the whistleblowers are shocked and stunned that Paxton is claiming this, and they call it slander and shameful, basically, or basically believing that he can fire and slander with impunity any employee is something that is shameful. The fact that he would not have to face any kind of accountability for this conduct. So that is the story in Texas I wanted to bring up. Then there's another story here to move on to. We've got a development with Rebecca Jones in Florida. This is the COVID-19 data whistleblower who was raided by Florida state agents who were accused of being kind of deputies. Some even went in as far to say they were like Ron DeSantis's, or he's the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis's Gestapo, basically, because they showed up to her home and raided her, arguing that she was involved in hacking into a state emergency health network to transmit a message taunting the governor. That's how WUSF, which is a public media in southern Florida, that's how they describe what she was accused of doing. Well, the development here that I wanted to highlight, we talked about the raid. I won't go over the raid again. Everyone's who has any basic knowledge of this case saw the agents entering into her home, and they had their weapons. One agent at least had a gun drawn, and so now a circuit judge has declined or refused to return 3 computers, 2 cell phones, and 3 thumb drives that were seized by state investigators back on December 7th. And he says that he thinks there likely is probable cause for the search warrant and the raid that was conducted. Her constitutional rights were not violated in the search, and he's waiting to see if they will file charges against her. They have not filed criminal charges against Rebecca Jones, and so he's holding off on returning her electronics. And she's doing pretty well as far as what has happened to her. She's been able to raise over $500,000 in order to fight this case, but it could be a long road ahead as she battles whatever sort of case is brought against her. It's already tinged with politics, and the money she's raising, she's saying she's going to use to try and defeat Governor Ron DeSantis. Her accusation, let's just recall, against Ron DeSantis was that he was manipulating COVID-19 data about deaths in the state. And then she was removed from her spot in Florida in I believe it was in the health department. And so, is there a potential that she could face some kind of a felony criminal case? That is not the case yet. She does not officially have charges against her, but the investigation continues, and it's always been kind of flimsy. And what it really pointed to was a lack of security on the part of the system, where a message was able to be sent, and there's some question of though the IP address has been attributed to her home address, there's some question about who the identity is of the person that actually sent this message, and the message isn't even really anything that should have risen to this level where you go and raid somebody's home. So that is the latest with that story. Sarah is asking, what did Rebecca Jones allege? I don't know if I just answered it there, but she's a whistleblower and a target in Florida because she has challenged the state's reporting on figures of the total number of deaths in the state, believing that they're lowballing them and not considering them correctly, not tallying them correctly. The last thing I have before we get to Assange is to point out the fact that we have charges now against Rick Schneider, who is a donor to Joe Biden, was a prominent supporter of Joe Biden, but he's a Republican governor in Michigan who is linked to the poisoning of the water in Flint, Michigan. And also now he is going to be on trial for a couple of misdemeanor charges related to his corruption. And there's an article that was put out that highlights the lack of whistleblower protections. This was done by Michigan Live. This calls attention to a House representative who is working on introducing a bill to basically ensure that allegations against governors or their appointees from state workers, those state workers would have whistleblower protections. There's been support in the Michigan House for whistleblower protections, but last year we saw Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who is a Democrat, she vetoed a bill that would have prohibited state departments from disciplining workers who communicate with the legislature about problems in the state government. It passed unanimously in the House and the Senate. It called for creating a new law to ensure state workers were protected if they came forward as whistleblowers. But then Gretchen Whitmer, who was a big supporter of Biden, she was a surrogate, she vetoed this legislation. And so, there's been this outlandish and unjustified concern on the part of Democrats that the Republicans are going to abuse whistleblower laws for their own political purpose. Whether they're going to have this kind of like state level sort of Benghazi investigation against Gretchen Whitmer or not, she is using politics to go against establishing whistleblower protections. And the fact is that these kinds of protections would improve the future for people in Michigan who would like to not be poisoned and not suffer the way they have extensively suffered for the last several years because of what was done. And the Flint water crisis has made international news because it represents an incredible act of corruption and depravity on the part of a government to do this to their own people, treat them as basically sacrificial and disposable. And so there's been quite a clamor for some form of justice. And finally, this past week, a modest kind of victory where they're not felonies. They aren't the most serious of charges. They're misdemeanors, but the potential for a trial to actually take place against Rick Schneider and a couple cronies associated exists. And certainly people on the ground, activists who have fought for justice, are cautiously optimistic that there will be some accountability. Accountability will break out, at least temporarily, in the state of Michigan. And then the final thing I want to raise here is the Australian nonprofit that has launched a campaign to pardon Assange. So here's the part of our show where we cover Julian Assange and give you some updates. Of course, he was denied bail and is still at the Belmarsh High Security Prison, where the COVID-19 pandemic remains a risk, where we should assume and presume that it continues to spread. And we are having few to no figures shared publicly about what is going on in the facility. And we have the blueprint for free speech in Australia. is taking advantage of these final days. Say, better late than never. They definitely are waiting until the last minute here to push this, but in these final days, if there is any likelihood that Donald Trump would pardon Julian Assange, in spite of the incredible political pressure, he's probably much more concerned about his businesses and his first 100 days out of the White House. We're talking about the first 100 days of Biden and his presidency, but the first 100 days of Trump post-presidency are likely looking like murder for Donald Trump, and he's lost all kinds of support in corporate America, and he's trying to hold on to sponsorships. And my guess is he's more preoccupied with that, and it's highly unlikely that he's going to be giving some of the pardons he might have if political developments hadn't become so intense. I mean, he was just impeached, and like that's definitely more of his concern. That said, I understand why they're pushing for this pardon campaign, and I think it's the right thing to do. And this is coming from Australia with the Blueprint for Free Speech, saying that the ruling's a relief, but as long as the U.S. indictment remains in place, it poses an existential threat to national security, journalism, and investigative reporting in the United States and abroad. For Assange, too, it means the threat is only delayed until he has to leave the UK, which he will likely be obliged to do later this year. Absent a political agreement, the US could simply issue a new extradition request to his next country of residence. So this pardon is a good This pardon campaign is a good one, especially from Australia, because it's looking ahead to the fact that there needs to be a pardon for the alleged acts in this indictment, because then Justice Department prosecutors won't be able to bring a new indictment if he goes back to Australia and leaves the UK. So we do not know where he's going to be if he prevails in this extradition case. That seems rather premature to start talking about what Julian Assange is going to do if he wins. However, this starts to try and create some kind of a guard, a protection for Julian Assange in the event that he does win, that the government won't turn around and try to get him from Australia. If he would like to return there, that's where he's from. He's an Australian citizen. So that is an important thing. Now, I don't know how many of you would like to hear about this, see this, but I would like to spend the last moments of this hour going over something that was personal to me, which was I was invited on the Al Jazeera show, The Stream, and then I was told that they did not have space for me on the panel because they were inviting on a former NSA lawyer who was a cybersecurity expert in order to talk about the case, and they felt that the government perspective was essential to include in the program. And so they said no to me, and they included Rebecca Vincent, who is a campaign director for Reporters Without Borders. I did an interview with her that was, uploaded to the Shadowproof YouTube. There's also Greg Barnes, who happens to be loosely involved or associated with this Blueprint for Free Speech, this pardon campaign out of Australia. And he was invited to be part of the broadcast. So the Assange perspective was represented, and I don't have any issue with it being one-sided. What I have an issue with is being told that my slot is not going to be available as it was planned, because they find that it is more important to include the intelligence perspective in there, and to include someone who is not that much of an expert. In fact, I think that they hyped the knowledge that she has about the Assange case. So even claiming that she knows the way the U.S. government views Julian Assange. No, she identifies with the people who are prosecuting Julian Assange, but that does not make her an expert on what they are doing. Yeah, just because I would favor activists and I would reflexively defend the right of people to protest doesn't mean I'm suddenly an expert if people are hit with grand jury subpoenas as activists and swept up in some kind of a fishing expedition. That doesn't suddenly make me somebody who should go to the top of the list as a guest if I have no idea what these people are being prosecuted for. So I've got this queued up, and I would just like to make the case that the show would have been much better if they did not have her on the broadcast. The government perspective, I would say, as it is important. I mean, people need to understand why it's dangerous and what the government is saying and why they're going after Julian Assange, and nobody would dispute that. But I just don't think that she's even the right messenger to articulate that, because I don't think she even knows what's going on in this extradition case. And so let me go ahead and bring this up. I've got a few spots here in this discussion that I want to share. We may go past the hour, but my idea here is that the this part of the show I might clip as my own kind of takedown of what she had to say. And one could argue that she isn't even worth it because it's clear she was a hack. But I just have to make a point for my own dignity that this woman, this national security so-called national security or cybersecurity expert, didn't deserve to be part of this at all. And the stream could have done a far better job trying to find someone. I mean, this is the best they could do. I guess it's good that the government perspective comes from someone who's weak. It means that the show happens, but also the stream's not really built for a debate. Anytime debate looked like it was going to break out, the host has to bring in somebody from the YouTube, or has to bring in some kind of 30-second video that they recorded, or has to do this, or they have the thing with the stream is that they have all kinds of different things happening across platforms, and it's like, we got to get this all crammed in here in 22 minutes, and we've got 3 people, and we've got to we only have like a minute to hear from you, and then somebody wants to respond to the other person, but they really only have like 20 seconds because they've got to get to another video, or they've got to post a tweet, or whatever, and it's kind of sensory overload. So this was the show. I'm bringing this up, so I'm going to go to where this is April Doss. And April Doss is somebody who got ahead of all of this back on April 11th, 2019, when Julian Assange was arrested and expelled. She was part of a group of people who were involved in pushing propaganda about this case being one of hacking and computer crime, criminal activity with computers, rather than journalism. So her first comment wasn't even related to any of the reasons why she was invited on the show. This is the first thing that she said in the broadcast. Oh, wait, hold on. I think I might not have done this correctly. So let me make sure that I have the audio playing for this. So now I believe this will work. So here we go.
For making sure that they are taking into account those very concerns. I would note, I don't think it's clear or certain that what specific conditions of confinement Assange would have if in fact he were extradited. But certainly it would be important if the extradition goes through to make sure that any confinement is carried out in accordance with international norms.
So that's false. She said there that she does not think that we know what specific conditions Julian Assange would be kept in if he was extradited. I followed multiple days during the extradition trial when testimony was put on the record, and the government said its piece about what they thought would happen with Julian Assange, but they also kept it very vague and undefined. And the defense team, Julian Assange's legal team, put a lot of evidence on the record and said that, in fact, we did know, because he's going to be placed under special administrative measures because he's viewed as a national security threat by U.S. intelligence agencies who would lobby the Attorney General to take it seriously and make sure that he doesn't continue to disclose classified information from within a prison cell as he awaits trial or even after he is convicted. So this woman starts off her answer saying she thinks that it's interesting. Whenever somebody starts their answer with "this is interesting," they don't know. They just don't. They're buying time. But then she says something and pays lip service to the idea that the judge is protecting Julian Assange's rights. But she doesn't care. Again, she's buying time. She's trying to figure out what she's going to say. She should not have been asked about this topic because she has no idea about prison conditions in the United States. She's a former NSA lawyer who knows about cybersecurity, if she even knows about anything. So asking her about how Julian Assange is going to be treated in a prison in the United States is a waste of the viewer's time because she has nothing meaningful to offer. She doesn't know. And so then, of course, she gave this answer, and people who are watching are saying Rebecca Vincent was awesome. And I'll just keep playing because Rebecca had a great comeback to this.
I'm just looking here at what Stella Morris, who is Julian Assange's partner, have been saying about Belmarsh prison conditions. I'm going to share these with you, Rebecca. I'm sure you've probably seen some of these. Just heard from Julian. It's freezing in his cell. The hot water pipe system in Belmarsh prison broke. He says it's getting really, really cold. We're at a critical juncture. We need to get him out of prison now. Rebecca, thoughts?
I mean, it's appalling. We've seen what he has faced at Belmarsh prison now for some time. And the judge's decision not to release him on bail is at odds with her extradition decision. On Monday, we heard her detail these very mental health issues that will be exacerbated with a prolonged period of detention. She mentioned that it would be worse in the US prison conditions, but actually stated clearly that these issues have been present throughout his period of incarceration at Belmarsh, even with support such as frequent access to his family. We know that he would not be given that in the US. And I'm sorry, but I take issue with April saying we don't know what conditions he will face in the US. We heard days of expert testimony about that in September, about what special administrative measures look like in the US, the inhumane conditions he would face there. He would go to the same facility that Chelsea Manning actually attempted suicide in. We know very well what he will face. This is a highly vulnerable individual. That has also been well documented, and in fact, not even disputed by the prosecution's own medical witness that testified in September, who acknowledged the depression and the suicidal thoughts that Julian Assange has. But I want to take a moment also just to note, there's of course humanitarian urgency for his release. He should be released now for his physical health, for his mental health, but also as a matter of principle, we believe the entire case against him should be dropped. As a matter of principle, he should not be deprived unjustly of his liberty for another day. This case is about journalism. It is about press freedom. And in that regard, we were very disappointed with the substantive portion of the extradition decision, although of course relieved that the decision was against extradition on mental health grounds.
So that's great. That's an amazing answer. That's an excellent response to what April Doss is saying. And then April had a response to Rebecca. So this is why she was brought on the show. This is why the stream thought you all needed to hear her perspective.
April, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is really where I have to push back then. This really isn't about a journalism case. The Julian Assange's activities certainly have been in view of the US authorities since 2010. But the indictment itself, although it includes a number of counts, is not focused on speech activities. It's focused on computer crimes as the
All right, I'm gonna stop it right there. It really is focused on speech activities. It's not a true statement to say it's not focused on speech activities. It's the new allegations that were added, which she doesn't talk about at all, are targeting Julian Assange's speeches at so-called hacker conferences or tech conferences, where he went there and he spoke to people, and he is accused of trying to recruit systems administrators or essentially incite them to commit leaks, to engage in unauthorized disclosures, to steal information from the U.S. government. But it's targeting speech for speaking out about the need for transparency and how anyone entering government who's a systems administrator could be in a position to expose criminal wrongdoing or corruption within U.S. government agencies, because they themselves would know, because of their work, what the government was up to, and so this has become something in which he is a target. Julian Assange speaking out in support of Edward Snowden, that's being targeted. That's a speech activity. And also, Julian Assange has been targeted because of the alleged chat that he's alleged to have been a part of with Chelsea Manning when she was a soldier. The alleged speech is that there was a conspiracy to commit a computer crime, that there was an agreement to help Chelsea Manning crack a password. So this is speech. These are speech activities. In fact, almost half, if not a majority of the case, if we're not talking about publication, does go to speech, that they are saying Julian Assange engaged in taking speech and twisting it to give it this kind of nefarious or sinister tinge, as if he's an enemy of the United States that has to be combated. So this is obviously something she's totally blind to, because she identifies with people in U.S. intelligence agencies. So she thinks that naturally everything that comes out of Julian Assange's mouth is looks like a plan to take down the United States' empire. But I must say that most of his speech is all about the act of supporting sources. It's about the WikiLeaks organization. It's about how he could protect a source. In this case, if this is in fact Julian Assange in the chat, he is having a conversation with a source, Chelsea Manning, about how he can help her and how he can support Chelsea Manning with the publication of her information and ensure that she isn't identified by the authorities, which is something that journalists do all the time in order to conduct their work. So let me continue here, because April, this is about hacking and not journalism. DOS is not finished.
as the primary instigating factor. Now, where it's a complicated indictment, and for viewers who may not have read it, there are charges of conspiracy. There are charges of hacking, essentially, unauthorized access.
I'll just say here that the U.S. government wants it to be more complicated than it really is, because they know that if we talk about it in this very basic term of it being a threat to journalism, then they lose. They have to make it complicated. They have to suggest that it's confusing to the public and that people like me aren't talking about it in a accurate manner in order for them to, him and haw and even get out a word that might make their side look like it has any leg to stand on.
Access to computers or exceeding authorized access to computers, both attempts alleged by Assange himself and attempts that he allegedly encouraged others to make. And then there's charges relating to publication of classified defense material.
I'm going to go back because I've cut up her sentence, and I want to make sure people are able to get where we are in her answer. But she's referring to these allegations that were added of Julian Assange inciting or encouraging hacking. They added some allegation related to LulzSec, and they bring in Sabu, and they bring in a disgraceful person who was convicted of charges involving pedophilia. And this is the minor or the teenager who is not named in the indictment, the latest version, but we know it's Ziggy. And there's a lot we could say about that individual, which April Doss is clearly ignorant of as she talks about this part of the case. But we didn't get any specifics in the extradition trial about this hacking that she's talking about, this encouraging of hacking. And I think we should just presume that she doesn't really even know this part of the case, and she might have some basic knowledge of the alleged computer crime, but she's also misconstruing that conspiracy to commit a computer crime. So I'll just pull this back a little bit and let's keep listening.
It's a complicated indictment, and for viewers who may not have read it, there are charges of conspiracy. There are charges of hacking, essentially, unauthorized access to computers or exceeding authorized access to computers, both attempts alleged by Assange himself and attempts that he allegedly encouraged others to make. And then there's charges relating to publication of classified defense material. From a U.S. freedom of speech perspective, the press protections in the US fall broadly within the First Amendment to the Constitution. And the charges relating to publication of defense information are the ones that have caused many First Amendment scholars in the US to, sort of look sideways at it and say, is this really, sort of an untested area to go down? However, it has always been the case that journalists don't get a free pass for breaking the law. And so while WikiLeaks may have been founded with the intention of publishing information, as news reporting organizations do around the world, if in fact Assange was involved either in attempting himself or encouraging others to attempt hacking into computers, that's a crime. And that's what he's been charged with in this indictment. And so the physical world corollary.
Actually, she's wrong, because there are no charges of him encouraging people to hack. Those are just allegations that have been added as gloss. And again, she's not even talking about those specifically. So I assume that she is still talking in vague terms about the conspiracy to commit a computer crime, which is the charge of him and what he allegedly said in a chat with Chelsea Manning. She gives lip service to the press freedom protections or the First Amendment protections in the United States. She's not saying anything, though, about how prosecutors have taken this position that Julian Assange may not be able to have First Amendment rights in the United States. It's a position that Mike Pompeo, you can go back to the beginning of our show, Mike, who needs a safe space, Pompeo, has said that, in fact, WikiLeaks and Julian Assange do not have First Amendment rights because these people are not Americans. So he thinks that they should not be granted these constitutional protections for their work as members of the press. And anyways, I don't think she really understands what she's talking about.
To this, right, is that reporters have long published information that was obtained from confidential sources in hard copy, for example, out of a government office or a corporate office or something like that. The reporters typically do and should have protection for publishing information that has been provided to them. However, a reporter who breaks into an office and steals files out of a file cabinet certainly can be charged with the crime of breaking and entering and theft. And that's essentially what this U.S. indictment attempts to do, is focus on the computer crime dimension of it. And that's what's at the heart of the allegations.
Except Julian Assange did not break into any computer. And in fact, Chelsea Manning did not break into any computers. And the fact of the matter is that Chelsea Manning had access to all of this material, and there was nothing for her to break into. And so this is completely incorrect for her to act like this is analogous to a reporter entering an office and stealing files, because Julian Assange wasn't in the Pentagon system. And so this is not even similar. It's not identical at all. So why this woman is considered an expert, why this cybersecurity expert, and I keep saying woman, I would just say man if she was a man. I'm not trying to gender this, just to be clear here. Why this cybersecurity expert was not was invited to be part of this program is absolutely nuts. The idea that there wasn't anybody else who could articulate what the government is doing in this case and present a perspective is I don't think anybody was able to take away anything of value from April Doss participating in this conversation. I'll just point out to you that I've done some coverage of this. So like her position is that the takeaway from this case is journalism is not a crime, but hacking is. That's the quote she gave to USA Today on the day that Julian Assange was arrested. And she did a kind of media blitz, getting her name out there as a voice who could defend the Assange indictment. And this was always far-fetched. Anyone like April Doss, who argued that this was not about journalism, could have just opened up the indictment. I mean, she's either deliberately lying or she's being willfully ignorant. And in either case, that should disqualify you from being an expert who comes on shows and talks about this. So she's outed herself as a hack, because if you look at the indictment and you read through it, there's charges. There's one charge that specifically criminalizes Assange for allegedly knowing Manning had made unauthorized disclosures of classified information to WikiLeaks. That charge is the computer crime charge. It says that basically Assange should have rejected the documents from Chelsea Manning because at the time, the government argues he knew Chelsea Manning was breaking the law. So this is from the indictment. I'm reading this from the indictment. At the time, Assange agreed to receive and received. So just a second. Let me go ahead and take this down. I'm going to make myself the screen again. So I'm reading this. It says, at the time, Assange agreed to receive and received from Manning for the purpose of public disclosure on WikiLeaks the Assange knew that Manning was unlawfully taking and disclosing them, and at the time, Assange agreed to assist Manning in cracking the encrypted password hash. Assange knew that Manning was taking and illegally providing WikiLeaks with classified documents and records containing national defense information from classified databases. And if you look at this language, and April Doss is a lawyer. This is directly from the Espionage Act. It's not language from any law against computer crimes or defrauding the U.S. government. The Espionage Act refers to national defense information. It refers to receiving it, knowing that Manning was unlawfully taking and disclosing it. So this was a signal that the charge implicated journalism. You notice in her commentary that she gives for the stream, she never says the word Espionage Act. She's never talking about the law itself that makes this such a unprecedented case. I point out in my coverage that in the indictment, FBI Special Agent Megan Brown is referenced. She was assigned to the counter-espionage squad at the Washington field office in the District of Columbia, and she put together an affidavit that was submitted on the computer crime charge, and the charge was revolved around the publication of the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs. The affidavit confirmed that the Justice Department was alleging a computer crime as a way of targeting the publication of information that exposed evidence relating to U.S. torture and war crimes. So we know that this charge did in fact involve journalism. It involves journalism. It doesn't involve hacking. It's about journalism. It's the hacking is the veneer in which the U.S. government has tried to sell people on this case not being one that endangers press freedom. So I think I've belabored the point, but April Doss is not an expert on Assange, not an expert on WikiLeaks, not somebody who has even a remote understanding of this case. You can go look her up, April Doss, April Doss, and you cannot find any articles from her, any columns written about this. Remember, Julian Assange was expelled and arrested in April 2019, and she wrote and she commented on this case in April. But then when the Espionage Act charges hit in May, where was she? She didn't have anything to say. Why? Because those charges undermined her entire argument about this being a case against hacking. Now it was clearly about going after a journalist. So she disappears and she's off doing whatever for her law firm and herself. And so what happens the rest of the way during 2019 and then 2020 when we have the extradition proceedings and the extradition trial, she's nowhere. She's not giving comments to any publication. You can't find her. I went and looked. I tried to see what made her an expert on this. The only time that she commented was on the computer crime charge. And so for the stream to invite her, it's as if the viewers are supposed to believe that this case has not progressed and that we are still at the stage of the case where it was in April of 2019 when there was only one single charge against Julian Assange. But we are much farther along. There is a lot that has happened. And the fact is that she doesn't know anything. And the only thing that makes her someone who can speak on this is because she identifies with the prosecutors who are going after Assange, who would like to see him, or who some of them would like to see him, but they're perfectly fine with Julian Assange dying in a prison cell or being put behind bars for the rest of his life because they loathe and despise WikiLeaks that much. So that's why she got that slot. So anyways, again, like I may be accused of throwing a kind of tantrum, but it's a little bit about dignity here. It's about knowing that I think I could articulate the government perspective better than April Doss can articulate the government perspective, because I at least attack the government on the merits of their argument, which they really don't have much of one, but I understand what they're trying to do to Julian Assange fully, and I can place it into a context. And if you listen to April Doss, she has a very limited understanding. And I use understanding reluctantly because I don't have another word on the tip of my tongue for what she had to say. So thank you all for tuning in to the Dissenter Weekly. It's a much longer show because I decided to do some criticism of a media segment, in which I was invited on to participate. But in the end, I was basically told if I wanted to be a part of it, I could record a 30-second video, which is unpaid work that I'm not going to do. I have articles to write. I have streams to put together, broadcasts and interviews to produce. And I want to talk to you and engage with you. I have people who follow my work who would much rather be engaging in things like this rather than knowing that I'm going to waste 30 seconds of time to answer some question that's put to me for the purposes of their own broadcast when they've decided they don't have space for me. So why would I go to the trouble to be why would I let myself be tokenized? I don't, there are dozens of podcasts and people out there who have given me a platform to share this reporting. And if Al Jazeera English isn't one of them, I'm going to sleep perfectly fine at night, and it's not going to concern me. I'm not going to be worried that my journalism isn't going to reach a wide number of people. That being said, I'll just give credit where credit is due. You know, Rebecca Vincent did a great job in there, and Greg Barnes had some important comments as well. My objection to the stream's segment on Assange is that it's a bit scattered, and it seems unorganized, and there are things being said in which people just don't have enough time to respond, and you wish that it wasn't the format wasn't limited to 22 minutes, but that's news television. So this is why I do what I do. This is why I do it here. This is why I like longer form conversations, and this is why I prefer this format where, you know, I went into this thinking I would have a broadcast today that was about an hour. It's now gone much longer. It's gone 20 minutes over. So in that case, I wouldn't be able to do this if I was on a news network in which I had to fit into 1 hour. So thank you for coming along for the ride. Let me do the quick plug here, and I will put this up here for you all. As I always say, I have the Dissenter the Dissenter newsletter at Substack, dissenter.substack.com. And if you go to there, you can become a subscriber. I send out free newsletters, and then there's a portion that is exclusive. I still have the discounts for people if they subscribe for a yearly subscription. And there's no overtime. The overtime was my takedown of the cybersecurity so-called expert that was invited on to opine on Julian Assange. So with that said, I will be wrapping up now, and I'll thank you, everyone. You know, next week I will be back with some more streams. I'll have some more, hopefully at least work in one show with a guest that I'll do in the middle of the week. We'll have the inauguration of Joe Biden. And at that point, the responsibility of dropping the charges against Assange will be solidly in Biden's court. And we will watch as Merrick Garland is, I presume, confirmed to the position of Attorney General. And as the Justice Department moves on with its caseload and we follow the appeal, I will anxiously stay tuned in to the developments and look for any signals or any ultimate signs that they are going to either own this case or they are going to run from it. And of course, I would like to see Joe Biden and his administration run from it and bail on it like the Obama administration did back in 2013 and decide that they're no longer going to bring these charges against Julian Assange. But I also am aware that because this is in motion, they may not want to back off of it. They may want to let the process unfold. And that's, you know, to me, essentially death by 1,000 cuts for Julian Assange. So that's all I have for this broadcast. So until next time, I will see you around.